We are just days away from AFL Fantasy opening up for 2025. We don't have to pay for early access. You don't have to become a gold assistant subscriber of coaching or anything unlike those other formats. AFL Fantasy are just going to let you straight into the platform the moment it is eligible and open to. And for you, you can pick your classic team straight away. Now, looks like it's coming in the next week or so. It could be a few days either side, but they've all but guaranteed it's going to land for us before Christmas, which is exciting for the AFL fantasy community. So on this episode, I thought I'd do a quick episode looking at who I think are going to be the best backs, mids, rucks, and forwards to own for the year, who I think are the top averaging players, and ultimately putting together my way too early December edition of a best 22. Jumping into the back line straight out, I got Lachie Whitfield. Was one of the best defenders for us last year and has been for a big portion of his career an absolute premium weapon. His ability to read the play, to set up his teammates with his elite kicking, the playmaking of how he sets up open space opportunities and then hits with precision. Like some kind of surgical procedure, just hits his teammates in the right position, takes kick-ins. They love to get the ball in his hands, rebounding out of D50, as well as that run and carry that he possesses himself. I just don't see a world where there's anything structurally that GWS team changes around him that forces him to not have this prime ball movement position. Arguably, the areas of the ground that GWS need to improve are not at the forward line, and certainly not that defensive line. That back six looks really, really tight. It's going to be through the middle of the ground. If anything, we see some level of change and transformation, which has low to no impact on Lachie. The only case I'll hear for someone saying he's not going to be a top six defender this year, in my eyes, again, it's December, it's before Christmas, but the only real pathway to me would be he gets injured. And that's been a narrative over his career, less so over the past 18 months to 24 months. But that's the narrative I'd at least listen to. In at D2, I got Harry Sheezel. Surprised he's just a pure defender, not going to lie. Positive is it opens up a world where he may just sneak forward status. I think it is about as likely as North Melbourne winning the grand final this year, but there's a world of possibilities and hope that it could land. Harry's just such a clean mover of the ball, such a good user, that even when he came off that halfback distribution role, they still funneled so much of the ball through him, and he's got this ability now to not just be this outside transition scorer. He's got some toughness about the way he gets the footy, jumps on loose balls, tackles. I think he's a complete midfielder, and we should still see him score well and truly enough to put him in this upper echelons of what it needs to be a top six defender. In at D3, Jack Sinclair. Basically back-to-back seasons of 102, and while they've changed a few variations and elements in their team, he's just such a good scorer. A lot of his work is done through transition, but he can get the ball at stoppage, a nice clearance player when it's required, and can get his hands on the ball and then use that speed to either farm the ball out by hands to a teammate that's running through, or use that turn of pace that he's got, just that over that 2 to 3 meters to create separation from where that congestion is going on. I still think the best spot for him is coming off half back, and the combo of him and Nazaya Wanganeen-Miller running off half back and then pushing up to the wings and the flanks just feels really damaging to me. I know there's a McRae, a Travalia, and some other elements that have changed through this midfield mix. I think Sinclair's still going to get a clip every now and then, but I'm just really comfortable with him. I'm probably not going to start him, but I'm really comfortable that he's heading for another 100-plus year in our backlines. D4, Max Holmes. Scored well across half-back last year. That's how he gained defensive status during the season, and scored well when he was released back into the midfield. I feel like Geelong just do so well at developing these players. Holmes started off as a wingman, then moved into that half-back line, and now back into that inside midfield space. I think the combination of him and a Bailey Smith feels really scary, because that is speed for days coming out of this midfield, and both just love to take the game on. So to me, really, really happy to put him into that position. D5, Nick Newman. One of the best defenders for us last year, and the only narrative that I'm open to hearing a challenge on Nick is, well, last year everything fell his way, which it did, and one of the things that fell his way in enabling the ball to be channeled so much through him was injuries to other players that had previously taken a market share through that halfback line. I'm alluding to Mitch McGovern in and out of the side a lot of the year, but more predominantly a Sam Doherty. Now, Sam more recently has moved higher up the ground. Michael Voss does seem to want to use him more through the midfield, and I still think that's where his more likely space is to be. But there's a world where the arrival of a Jagger Smith, the emergence continuing of an Elijah Hollands, Chera back into that midfield mix if he can get his body right, well, all of a sudden now maybe there is a pathway for Doherty to spend just another 10, 15, 20% into that halfback spot, and that would certainly hurt the market share scoring of a Nick Newman. But for me, right now, you got to make a call. I'm pretty happy to put him in at D5. They get so much of the ball through him. They've got other players in that back line that are damaging weapons, but there's something he brings that those other players that are currently in that defensive six don't. So to me, Newman, you could get my D5 spot. And then at D6, look, you could probably throw a bunch of different people in here. You could put an Isaiah Wanganeen-Miller. I'll hear that conversation. You could put a Tom Stewart into that spot. I'll hear that conversation. But the guy I've gone for, Jordan Clark's another you could throw there, by the way. But the guy I've gone for is Luke Ryan. I know his back third of the season was a little underwhelming, but up until that point in time, he was up at that upper echelons with Sheasel, with Dacos, with Whitfield. And if you didn't have him in that first 2/3 of the season, he was taking the game away from you. So much so people were paying that $1 million markers just to get their hands on him, because so much of the way Fremantle play is so favourable to him and his fantasy scoring. He intercepts. I know he doesn't get bonuses from that like he does in Supercoach, but the ball just gets to him where he takes those +6s as intercepts. He takes so many kick-ins and almost always plays on. And then he's the type of player that if Fremantle just need to just shut the game down and shut the clock, he can score 20, 30 points within a matter of 2 minutes. That's just the game style he has. So to me, I'm still pretty confident that despite a bunch of things changing in and around that Fremantle line, I still think so much of that ball is going to be channeled in and around him. I don't think that's what's best for Fremantle, for what it's worth. I just think that's what's going to happen. Let's head into the midfield. My M1, you could throw an absolute blanket over a bunch of these guys. In fact, after who I think is M1, the M2 to M8, I'd hear an argument for any of them to be in any order, and probably another 5 or 6 to comfortably slide in. But I've got to pick some names, so here we go. Tom Green, for me, I think he's going to be the best midfielder in 2025. There's low levels of competition and market share. Josh Kelly, yep, got him on there. He's nowhere else in this episode, I promise. But he certainly seems to be stuck on the wing. Cornelio can't get his body right. Callahan, we all project him to emerge, but has yet to really show that he can do it for more than a game or two. That's why for me with the Tom Green, I just see him being so prolific with the ball, so hard to stop in contested situations, winning clearances. But then he's no longer just this bull at the contest. His work rate to get into space and take marks is really high. When he doesn't have the ball, he'll put pressure on and tackle and make it challenging for opponents. And then they're not the prettiest of shots in front of goal. I'll give you that. But his impacting of the scoreboard has certainly increased as the year's gone on. You take that injury-affected 7 out of the mix last year, well, all of a sudden he's back into that 104 sort of range. And he was a 108 the year before last too. So I just see a world where he can push 110 really quite comfortably. So for me, he's my M1. At M2, it's not an attractive pick, but it's a safe and reliable pick. And that is Andrew Brayshaw in at M2. Over the past 4 years, he's had 2 years averaging 104, and the other 2 years in that 4-year window, he's gone 110 plus. In the back half of the year post-bye, he went at an average of 107. I felt like Fremantle farted around at the front bit of the year positionally, and then they locked their team into a much better structure as the year went on. I'm still pretty happy that Andrew Brayshaw, even when he was in that positional volatility of is he wing, is he centre bounce mid, was still going at a 101. But I think he's going to be closer to a 108, 109, 110 range, which I know doesn't sound much, but outside of Treloar, we didn't have a mid going 110 last year. So a 108, 109 mid is enough to put you in these upper echelons. I know it's not as high as it's used to be, of the Rockcliffe, of the Swan, of the Gary Ablett, all Tom Mitchell conquering errors. But we get what we get, hey. In at M3, I'm really happy to get my hands on an Errol Goulden again in 2025. He does so much right. Run and carry, gets into space, impacts the scoreboard, gets in and under and wins contested ball, picks up the loose ball and uses the ball alongside of that really, really well. Yeah, I do see some change coming to this Sydney side, but I do not see it to be so drastically chaotic that an Errol Goulden is exclusively on the wing. And even if he is, by the way, there's something about his running patterns and football smarts that just gives me so much confidence that even if he was exclusively an outside player, he'd still find a way to score really, really well. So I'm happy to put him at M3. M4 might be the most boring block, push the game forward, throw a name in, Zach Merritt. It's not because Zach's a bad pick. It's just, he's just feels like it's just a lay down misère. Yes, Zach Merritt's going to be there. Even if the odd pathway of him falling out of that midfield mix, which I do not see happening. If they're going to want to make finals, Zach's got to be a key piece of this midfield unit. But let's indulge that thought for a second. Even if he does, he's so smart with the ball in hand. His way of reading the football game as it's unfolding is just so high that he would get himself into positions to set the game up for his teammates in any position. So to me, I don't see that happening where he falls out of that midfield mix as the primary option. But even if he does, he's just going to get there. Yeah, 1 or 2 tags will come his way and it'll give him an 80, but then he'll go on a run of 6 to 8 weeks and he goes at 120 and balances any of that pain out in totality of the year. That's why I'm saying it. By average, I've got him in at M4. M5, Connor Rosie. This one might be a little speculative for some, but just coming back 12 months ago, he was basically a 105 mid. And then last year, 20 games. If you split them into quarters, how did those 5-game blocks go for him? First 5 games goes at an average over 110. Next 5, 65. Why? Hamstring, ankle, multiple subbed out games. Next 5 goes again at 110 plus. Last 5 goes at a flat 100, basically. So all of a sudden, we've got an anomaly with a really clear narrative, which was that 60 average 5-game split. And then really, we're talking about a guy who's a 105, 110, and which is very similar to what he did the year prior. So to me, I'm very, very keen on Connor Rosie. I think he's closer to a 110 guy than a flat 100 guy, and I'm happy to put him in that spot. The fact is he's never going to get tagged. When you've got the likes of Butters and also Horne-Francis sitting in this side, I just do not see a world where he's not right at the top of the tree. I'm calling 2025 the year of revival. The revival for Jordan Dawson. He's my M6. He was a victim of his own versatility last year. The Crows had plenty of deficiencies in their side, plenty of deficiencies in the way they were moving the ball. And because of his ability to plug gaps and be so good at so many things, from intercepts, from the defensive efforts, from the playmaking, from the attacking run and carry, then the elite ball use, he ended up getting moved all over the ground to the flank half, back, intercept, control the game, the wing, give us some skill on the outside. Forward, we need another marking presence that's just going to take some heat when we didn't have that other tall with a Riley Fieldthorpe. All of a sudden, in the off-season, and with some injury luck, I just don't see the need for him to be bouncing around everywhere and for the likes of him to be set central in this midfield and others such as Soligo, Peatling, to become that core midfield group. And then the likes of Rankin can roll through there. Rochelle, if you want to do that. Even a Neil Bullen can do that. But they fixed those deficiencies with some speed and skill on the outside through the halfback and wings with Cumming. They fixed up that leadership presence in the forward line with Neil Bullen. They've got some health into Riley Thilthorpe. And then even a Dan Curtin, who's arguably his clone in many areas, has had another off-season. And if anyone's going to get moved in and around the gaps, I think it might be for Dan's development. So for me, Dawson's in at M6. Zach Butters at M7. He was so good last year. Burst scorer, has a nice ceiling about him, which I think could only get a little bit higher. And I think there's a growing narrative. While he did get a lot of tag games last year that hurt his basement, I think you can easily talk yourself into a thought of path. Is that even proper grammar? No. Do better, MJ. is Horn Francis's damage is so much higher than Butters. And also Butters is now having an entire off-season learning to work through a tag. These two things emerging, I think, enable Butters maybe not to see a drastic spike in his scoring, but to confidently let me see him be in this top echelon again. As the year went on, he got better, didn't he? And so for me, I'm happy to put Butters in at M7. Dacos is my M8. I could put a bunch of other names. I'd hear a conversation for Anderson. Clearly, I'd hear a conversation for Bontempelli, for Treloar, and a number of others. But for me, Nick Dacos, I think, is going to continue his growth as a footballer and as an AFL fantasy player. Just does so many things so well. And the arrival of Houston down back and the support of De Goey through the midfield, I don't actually think that hurts his share of scoring and share of the ball. I actually think that enables him to be in more damaging places and not have to do it all. With no Mitchell last year, no De Goey last year, it was really left to him and Crisp and Pendlebury to be able to do it all. And you just can't let the retiring pies be the guys that do it all for you. So I know I've just aged Crisp and Pendlebury and they're younger than me, but steady. I just think they needed that extra support to enable Dacos to be at his best. So to me, Dacos at M8. Let's jump into the rucks. I don't think you're going to be too shocked by my R1, Rowan Marshall. Back-to-back years going 115 plus. Just keeps getting better. Had all the injury concerns in the world last year and still just pushed through to be an absolute beast scorer for us. The top scoring by average, anyway, player in the game. He's just so good. I'm not concerned about the drafting of Dodson and the forecast at time of recording arrival of Boyd in the ruck. I just think they're development guys. I think Marshall's still clear and supreme number one ruck this year. R2, I'm going to go a little bit different. Most will go Cherry, and I'll hear and understand why. To me, though, I really like Tim English this year. I think we look at his last year with a little bit of disdain and disappointment, but he wasn't that far off the marker, especially if you believe one or two variables conspire against Tristan Sherry to bring him back down the list. And I'm alluding to just that high tackle count where he was averaged third in the AFL for tackles. If he drops one per game, well, all of a sudden he's right in that earmark shot of where Tim English could be. I'll hear a Gawn conversation here too, but for me, let's venture into different pathways. I can still see a world where Tim English scores well enough to get back to that 110 space in 2025. And then for the forwards to wrap up the episode, I do not love putting any forwards in a ranked order this year. I do not. It is a line that I think will be very boring and vanilla in our starting squads. I can see a lot of very similar players, but it's just gross to put them in a ranked order, but I've got to. This is gross. Bailey Smith. Yeah, I know it's coming off an ACL, but I suppose the positive narrative that I'm going to tell myself is he'll have had the whole preseason, barring any setbacks. It was over a year now that he's done that knee, and players that return slower from an ACL is generally because it's an in-season hit and their off-season is basically spent in recuperation and their preseason is spent in recovery, whereas Smith has done that. He's done the preseason work and the surgery work. He's now in full preseason mode at the Cats. So I think the combination of that, the fact that Geelong just set players up so well, and the fact that we know that when he was at the Bulldogs and playing through the midfield, not just on the wings, he was a fantasy scorer for us. So the pathway to him being probably the only forward that could push that 100 narrative, yeah, he's right in that mix. F2 is Dylan Moore for me. It's not an attractive pick, but it is a get-on base hit, absolutely. He ended the year well with a ton of tons, but he just keeps getting involved in the game. Unlike so many of these other guys in my forward line who require midfield presence to get into the upper echelons, he doesn't need that. Not just because of how good he is in and around the forward 50 with impacting the scoreboard, but his work rate is so high that he gets back into the half-back line, sets up play, pressure, tackles, becomes an outlet kick, and then his work rate to get back and then get involved in the scoring chain is so high. He's exactly the type of player that with this Hawthorn game style that sits beautifully for them, which is he's a scorer. And he's got a ceiling about him too. When Hawthorn get those dominant games and that wave of ball movement and chaos that comes with Hockball, geez, he's a good player. And so for me, I really, really like Dylan Moore. I don't think you can start him because I'm not sure there's a heap of value that's embedded into him. I also don't think the volume of ceiling games is going to come so early in the year I could start it, but I'd hear that conversation. Christmas came early for some of us. Jason Horne-Francis is a forward. I've got him as my F3. Now, I'm not forecasting a crazy jump. I know he's kind of getting now to this fourth year of breaking out and becoming the dominant midfielder in the Port team, which could happen. But I just worry that is there too much split of the ball for him to really get to those high ends? He's never really been a high accumulator either. He's much more of an engine midfielder that just gets in and is grunt and wins the ball and then bursts with that turn of power and speed from anywhere that looks even vaguely contested. So to me, I just think those two things combined, his game style and then the other mids of Butters and Rosie with a little bit of Wines and Drew thrown in there, I just think that hurts his ceiling a little bit. And he may never get to those upper echelons because those tags will come, those challenging games will come, as they do for every player in the AFL. Just don't know if he can get to the F1 spot in fantasy, but I do think he's going to be one of the best options rolling around for us. F4. Yeah. There have been two things I know to be true. The North Melbourne, whoever's that distributor, is a gift that has been there for years. McKercher, Fisher, Sheasel more recently, and then in the more kind of historic background, Hall and Zeeble. I also know that when a Caleb Daniel sits in that spot at the Western Bulldogs, he goes 90s and has a little bit of ceiling about him in there and is a premium defensive option for us. Well, for us, those two things have combined, let alone the price point we're going to be paying for him. Those two things have combined. And to me, he's just an easy walk-up pick. If you said to me he's the F1 for 2025, I'd hear that conversation very loudly because I can see the reason for why you'd land there. But for me, I'm going a bit conservative. I'm going to put him at F4, but he's still amongst the best six forwards for the year. Isaac Rankin is my F5. I think the Crows will rebound. Yes, I've taken my Crows goggles off, I promise. But I just think the only reason he doesn't sit in this top six is that soft tissue hamstring injuries keep getting the best of him. Because when he's up in and around that midfield, he's around that 9,500 scoring forward for us. And the reason he's so good in that position isn't just he offers a dynamic X factor that the Crows don't have in their team at the moment, but it's the handover of when he then goes from the mid to the forward and from the forward to the mid is actually where he gets his greatest work done and fantasy scoring, because you want a different type of player on him in the midfield to what you want in the defensive area and vice versa. And if you don't get that handover as an opposition done cleanly and you give him half a metre to a metre of space in any portion of the ground, his skill set is so high, his football IQ is elite, that he will just cut you up. And so that's where he actually does his greatest damage, is moving in and out of these zones and opposition struggling to connect the dots cleanly and crisply. And that's when he'll do his greatest damage. I think, barring hamstrings, he's going to be a top six forward for us this year. And then in at F6, I told you I didn't like the forwards. I feel like this is everybody's going to pick him, and I want to have a proper conversation about him in the preseason. But for now, it's as good as an option as I got. Jack Macrae at F6. I understand and could see the pathway to premium forward scoring, which, by the way, a premium forwards are 90 now. Let's not think it's 2 years ago where it's like a 105 forward is what we need. No. The pathway to 90 is there, playing as an inside mid in a team that suits his scoring style, which is a lot of possession heavy, lot of marks, lot of transition scoring, which is what Macrae needs rather than the stoppage scoring. So to me, the pathway is there. It's easy to believe and understand. I don't love it. We'll talk about why in the preseason, but for me, Jack Macrae is my F6. What do you think of my best 22, my predicted best options upon every line. Do you agree or disagree? Comment below and let me know what you think about these players in the best 22. And when the format opens, promise I'll do a way too early team reveal. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, do make sure you've done that. And then check out in the description below all the details to get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch, join our Patreon, and get in touch with us across social media. Hey, thanks for watching, and we can't wait to be back chatting AFL Fantasy with you again very, very soon.